Hi, good morning. Here we are again in our Sunday school class, still dealing with the Christmas story, dealing with a time when Jesus was just a boy, and we talked last week about how he had been presented at the temple for circumcision, and he had been recognized by Simeon and Anna, the prophetess there, and was blessed in that, and we got a big mix up right here. It's not a mix up. It's just there's places in the Bible where you study it, and then it jumps ahead, and there's no real explanation given. But in this case, we start out in our lesson here that what has happened is that Joseph had 4 dreams, and when you look at this, and the first one was being when the angel Gabriel came to him and talked to him about not to be afraid to take Mary because she was pregnant. She was going to have this baby Jesus, and not to be afraid to go ahead and marry her and take her there. And then in the second time, the next dream that we see there is the baby Jesus has been born. He has actually came to the time when and I want to read this to you so that I don't mess it up. But back in the book of Matthew, and beginning in verse 13, it says, now they have just come from the temple. Jesus has been circumcised. He has met Simeon and Anna, the prophetess, again. And Joseph has this dream, and as they were getting ready to leave, and it says, and when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. We don't really have a long any kind of a discourse to say how long they were in Egypt, but they were there for some time until such as the time that Herod died. And then they come back there down in verse 19. We start in verse 13, we drop down to verse 19, and we see where Joseph has got the third dream. And it says, when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And anyway, it says, and he arose and took the young child and his mother and came into the land of Israel. But when they heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And that talking about Joseph. And he said, notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, this is the fourth and final dream that we see that Joseph had here. He turned aside and went into the parts of Galilee, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. So that accounts for some of this time from the time that the wise men, we call them the 3 wise men, but when the wise men came, they inquired of Herod where this baby might be born and where he might be at, and we have seen before that they were in Bethlehem, and Joseph had spent some time there. He was no longer in a cave in a manger. Jesus wasn't, but now they are in a home, and they've established a home, and these magi, these wise men have came, and they've worshipped him, and they sense that Herod was not what he was claiming to be. He was not claiming to come and worship Jesus, and actually what he did in that time when they left to go to Egypt, he sent his soldiers to Bethlehem, and they killed all the babies under 2 years old. That was in Bethlehem and the area around that. And so anyhow, having said all that, then we drop back into verse 39 in our lesson for today. And we'll drop off really down into verse 41. But in 39 it says, and when they had performed these things according to the law of the Lord, they returned into Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth. In other words, we had all that time that I was telling you about. We had that in there, and now life is going to kind of get back to normal. And we see them coming back to Nazareth. It says there in verse 40, and the child grew and waxed strong in spirit and filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. And Jesus, I believe this, that looking at Scripture, that Jesus was the kind of a young man that everybody just liked. I think he was a good kid and not a whole lot of trouble to anybody. And I think that because it says the grace of God was upon him, and he grew, and as he grew up, he was wise in his mindset and in his thinking, and growing in wisdom, and filled with all that and the grace of God. And it says, now we come really to where the lesson actually starts here. It says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. This was one of the feast, the celebrations that was required of Jewish men to go to every year. There was actually 3 of them. We won't get into those others. But when the Passover was being celebrated, that was a big, big thing in Jerusalem. And it was not just a one-day affair. It was a 7-day affair, actually an 8-day affair, if you follow the whole thing through. And Jesus had come to the place there in the Scripture. It says there in verse 42 that he was 12 years old at this time. And Jewish culture of that day, in the Jewish culture of that day, he had been brought up to the age of 5 years old by his mother, and she'd been teaching him the right way to live and the right way to do and all that stuff, and actually beginning to teach him about the law and the Torah. But then from the age of 5 up to about 10, this was intensified. This teaching was, but all Jewish boys did that. And because Jesus was the oldest son, when he became 13, his whole life changed. We think of in our country like maybe 18 or maybe 21 when kids might be thinking about getting out of college and moving on with their life. But back then, and for them, 13 was a big time. It changed a lot of things in a young man's life, in the sense that at 13 he would be brought to the temple or to the synagogue where they worshipped, and he was given his bar mitzvah. Now, what that means is he become a son of the covenant, son of the commandment is what that means. That bar mitzvah, but. That was a big change because he was expected to do a lot of things. That was a time in his life where he could actually become a member of the ruling party of a synagogue at that stage in his life. Remembering now that he's been studying for years to bring him up to this point, he is going into a period, again, of intense study to know the law, because at the age of 50, then he could be one of the elders that sat in a city gate and legally could give advice and things like that. So it was a big change for him. It was also a time when we see where Joseph was a carpenter. In that culture, the first oldest son was expected to follow in his father's footsteps, whatever his trade was. We see that Joseph was a carpenter from other places in the Scripture, so at the age of 13, Jesus began to train as an apprentice carpenter under his father. And so that was what was going on in this young man's life up into that point. And it says, when they had fulfilled the days and they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem. Remember now, they're at the Passover, and in Jerusalem, the Passover, Jerusalem has grown from just a city to a metropolis of a city. Thousands and thousands of people from all over have come there for this Passover, and then the Feast of the Unleavened Bread and the Tabernacles, and all this was kind of bunched in together. But the city was, it exploded in population. And so we kind of have to have a little bit of a picture of that in our mind there. And it said, when this was over, when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. They were, in verse 44 there, it says, but they, Joseph and Mary, supposing him to have been in the company. You can look at that, and sometimes that's translated caravan, that word company, and went a day's journey, and they sought him among their kinsfolks and acquaintances. They would travel like that in caravans or large groups for protection, for fellowship, for visiting. Actually, when you go back into the Old Testament, you go back in the book of Psalms, you can read in the Psalms in different places it says a song of degrees. And in certain places there, they would sing these songs at different stations as they came to Jerusalem for the Passover. And that's not got anything to do with this lesson, but that's the way, that's what happened there. But anyway, they had traveled a day's journey out away from Jerusalem, headed back towards Nazareth. And we talked about how that they would go north out of Jerusalem, and they would have to go around Samaria and get back up into Upper Galilee where Nazareth was, and so they were going home. But we said before that trip would probably take maybe 4 days, something like that, 4 or 5 days, depending on the circumstances, maybe a week, given the terrain that they had to go through. But anyway, it says, they sought him amongst their kinfolks and acquaintances that was in this caravan, and lo and behold, he wasn't there. And things begin to happen. They're looking for their son. Now this again, the culture of the day, it was not a peaceful time. Talk about in the end last week, or maybe even week before, when Jesus was there was no room for him in the end, and maybe that might have been really a good thing, because inns were not good places for a young man and his wife to be at that time. And so anyway, it says, when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem. So we've got a day out, a day back, and then on the third day they find Jesus. And I think about when Stephen, our son Stephen, when he was 4 or 5 years old, and Walmart was back up here at the other location, Isaiah, my wife, and another lady, they were in there shopping. And Stephen knew that Santa Claus was down in the mall. And while they were in there looking at dresses or something, he slipped out underneath and he disappeared. And when they got to looking for him, she was in a panic. Number one son was gone, and nobody knew where he was at. And they had everybody in that store looking for him, and actually they had the store locked down. He's up in his 40s now, so it's been a long time ago. And Isaiah said, she thought, well, he maybe slipped down there to go see Santa Claus. Well, she went down in the mall, and sure enough, he was sitting down there on a bench just watching Santa Claus visit with the other kids, and realizing now that was a different time. And I think she snatched him up and busted his rear end right there in front of a whole bunch of people. You can imagine how scared she was, and how scared Mary was, and all this going on. And there was some poor lady, and I almost feel sorry for her, decided to educate on Isaiah that you ought not spank your kid in public. That was not a good thing, you know. But I kind of felt a little bit sorry for her because I knew she was catching it up one side and down the other for interfering in that deal. But anyway, back to the lesson here again. They said when they found him not, they turned back again to Jerusalem seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking questions. Now this was unheard of in this time. It was just something that they did not do for a young boy. Now he's not 13 yet. He's 12, and he's in a time of intense education in the Torah and all that. But he's not there yet. But yet here he is in the temple, and these men that are probably in the neighborhood of 50 years old, some older, some were the Levites were probably, some of them nearing retirement, but these people were experts in the law. And then we have a 12-year-old boy that is here talking to them like an adult. But you know, I had a little note in here on my in my lesson book that it says the first thing that Jesus was doing was he was listening. He was hearing them. You know, that's a really good way to learn is to actually hear what people are saying to you. I know it makes a greater impact if you've got some type of a object lesson to make it stick in your brain, but you've got to hear before you can receive on anything. And Jesus, in his young wisdom, that's what he was doing there. He was listening to these guys and asking them questions, and the depth of the questions that he was asking them, they were fascinated by it. They were amazed at this young man that seemed to have this kind of understanding of the scripture. But anyway, when Joseph and Mary came in, it said, when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou dealt this way? And remember now, she's got a right to be mad. Joseph Jesus being who he is and all that has gone on in his life there, she has a right to be upset about that as well as Joseph there. And his mother said unto him, Son, why hast thou dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing. And that word sorrowing there, it means that she was just in anguish about she's lost her son and her firstborn, and on top of that, he's the Son of God, and you know, how do you deal with that in your mind? I've lost God. You know, how do you deal with that? And she had the right to be upset with that. But it's amazing to me that Jesus, and all through his ministry, we see that he could talk to people and say things to people that were that might make some. If I said it to them, they'd probably be mad and at me forever. But he could say things to people in a way that was not offensive to them. And he told them, and he said unto them, How is it that you sought me? Don't you know that I must be about my Father's business? In none of the manuscripts do you see that word business added in there, because in the Greek, a lot of times they didn't put a word in when the answer was obvious. It was just not there. And so when the King James Version was translated out, they would add a word to put there. And so there they use that word business. Another word might be affairs, be about my Father's affairs there. But, you know, I thought about this next verse, and it kind of floored me in a way when I thought about what it said to kind of share with you. But it says, and they understood not the saying. They did not understand which he spake unto them. Now remember that they have been visited by an angel. Both of them have seen the angel Gabriel in their own homes. You'd think, well, would that not be enough that I'd kind of have this by now? They were visited by the shepherds at Jesus' birth that have seen the star, and they followed the star there and been visited by the angels themselves. But anyway, they've been visited by the angels, they've been visited by the shepherds, they've been visited by the wise men, and on top of that, Joseph has had 4 dreams directly from God. You think, ding, 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 is the light going to come on here? But yet, the thing that I think about Mary, Joseph is not, he's not mentioned there. This is the last time we hear anything about Joseph in the Bible. Even I don't think there's another reference even to him once you come past this point in their lives. But it said they have come back to Jerusalem. They've picked up Jesus. They they're going back home. And he says that he went down with them and came to Nazareth, his hometown, and he was subject unto them. But it says that again there over in chapter 2, verse 19, and chapter 1, verse 29, that she pondered these things in her heart, in her mind. As this come back, I can see the wheels turning in her mind as she's rehearsed these things that are happening and wondering what's going to happen next. But it says there in verse 52, and it's the last of this lesson here, it says, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Up until this time, when he was growing up, he was, I think he was probably an average looking kid. And as he was growing up and he began to be educated in the carpentry trade and learning more about the ways of God as he went through. It's easy to think, well, he already knew all that and probably did, but yet there's a time that he has to mature in his humanity. And it says that he grew in favor with God and man. And I already mentioned it a while ago, but I think that as he grew up as a young man, that he was likable. I think that he was just somebody that everybody liked him and enjoyed being around him. I think we can ascertain that from the scriptures. And so anyway, that's kind of where we end up stopping on this week's lesson. We see Jesus as he has gone from a baby, from about 2 years old now. He's up to somewhere almost to his adulthood. We're going to show up next week. We're going to look at his baptism and the beginning of his public ministry. We'll talk about that some, but up from for now, we're done with that. And so I'm going to just invite you to church. Come and be a part of our church. We're having our services 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, and we'd be tickled to death to have you. Thanks for watching. Bye.